So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on successfully addressing legislative requirements, including adulthood preparation subjects in personal responsibility education program implementation. My name is Patrick Ahern with RTI, and I'll be helping out with the virtual room today. Please note when you log in this afternoon, your microphone will be automatically muted. If you have any questions for our presenters, please submit those into the chat window. Or you may also click the raise hand button to let us know you'd like to be called upon to ask your question verbally. If you happen to run into any issues with Zoom today, please reach out to me in the chat window as well. We do have several polls today using Poll Everywhere. And in order to participate, please be ready to open Poll Everywhere in a separate web browser, or you may also use your smartphone, but more details on that later. So at this time, Michelle, I'll turn the meeting over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and welcome again to everyone. This is an overview of the logistics that Patrick just went over. Again, we'll touch in about the Poll Everywhere instructions once we get to those activities, and these same instructions are at the top of every slide that we will be using for Poll Everywhere. So here's what we have planned for you today. First, we'll start out with a welcome and introductions. Welcome again. We are so happy to have you here with us today. Then we will transition to talking about continuous quality improvement and how to assess implementation using CQI. We will then participate in an interactive activity to go over legislative requirements and review resources to ensure compliance with requirements. We'll hear from one of our grantees about the great work that they are doing. Then we will focus on adulthood preparation subjects. We'll have another grantee spotlight to hear more about the great work that's happening. And then we will spend a moment to reflect on how this content has been beneficial for you, and we will close after that. Here is what we hope to accomplish today. First, we want to help you locate resources on the exchange and other resources to support compliance with the legislative requirements. We've got a lot of resources to share. We'll be sharing those in the chat and as well a document towards the end. We also want to support you in identifying resources to ensure that programming emphasizes abstinence and contraception as strategies to reduce risk of pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. We are going to define the 6 adulthood preparation subjects and talk about how those are integrated with compliance for the legislative requirements. Lots more resources. We're going to talk more about resources to ensure that there is substantial incorporation of the adulthood preparation subjects into programming. And last but not least, we will talk about quality improvement as it relates to legislative requirements and APS. Here's our introductions. Again, I'm Michelle Dorsonville. So happy to be here with you today. I am a training and technical assistance provider with RTI.
Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Selentrop, and I am also delighted to be with you today. I am a training and technical assistance person with RTI as well, and my pronouns are she and her.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Zaveri. I'm a director in human services at Mathematica, and I work on I direct the PMAPs or performance measures and adulthood preparation subject contract that Mathematica and Child Trends conducts for ACF, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here with you today. My name is Kit Ruiski, and I use the she series pronouns. I'm the late adolescent health consultant with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. I manage and coordinate Wisconsin State Prep. And again, just happy to be here. And I will pass it over to Darlene.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Darlene DePina. I am the program director at the Arizona Department of Health Services. I oversee the adolescent health initiatives in our state. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm excited to be here today.
Excellent. Well, before we get started, we wanted to start out this webinar by grounding ourselves in the process of continuous quality improvement. I know there are some of you on the call that are brand new to prep, and this will be your first cycle of funding, while others have been implementing prep for over a decade. And so I think what we want to do is, as you come to this webinar today and think about what can I get out of this webinar, we'd really encourage you to think about continuous quality improvement. And this might be in thinking about where can I think about the breadth of the prep program, where do our data suggest that we could strengthen our implementation, or think about the programming that we're offering with respect to the legislative requirements that we'll cover today. So for example, this might mean you might want to strengthen the training you provide to facilitators to ensure that they have the skills to work with youth on topics related to abstinence and contraception. Or it might mean bolstering the content that you're offering as it relates to APS topics. As we move through this webinar, we'd encourage all of you to bring a CQI perspective and a growth mindset to the work that we're doing today. We'd invite you to think about the data that you're collecting that will allow you to understand if you're meeting the legislative requirements and if your program is leading to the intended outcomes that you're hoping to see among the youth you serve. Go to the next slide, Patrick. And this slide provides a visual representation of the CQI process. So essentially, CQI is the opportunity to reflect on what you did, what happened as a result, and what changes might be needed based on that, on what happened. And the cadence of CQI is really going to depend on the type of programming that you offer. For example, you might have a reflection meeting every 6 months. You might have, it might make more sense to conduct a review after each cycle of programming. It really depends on what you're offering to youth in your community, when you might have some data to review or fidelity logs or anything else. And the goal of CQI is to continue to improve programming over time. It's not meant to be a punitive review of failures, but really is an opportunity to explore potential improvements and growth and to create a sense among your team of how you can work together to continue to strengthen your work. If you go to the next slide, this is just thinking about how might we apply CQI when we particularly think about the legislative requirements that we need to meet with our programming. And this involves utilizing your fidelity monitoring data, any observation data that you're gathering, adaptation requests, and performance measure data to move through these different steps. So many of the prep programs are required to ask the following constructs. They're required to ask perceptions of how the prep program affected the behaviors related to the 6 adulthood preparation subjects. They're required of high school students, at least, to ask how the prep program affected their sexual behaviors and their intentions. They're required to collect experiences with peers and program facilitators, and experiences and observations of bullying during the prep program from participants, as well as satisfaction with the amount of material received about abstinence and birth control methods. All of these can kind of help you as we're thinking about the legislative requirements. And it's really important to work with your evaluation team if you don't have access to these measures at a group level, that you can get access to these data in a timely way that's helpful for you so that you can think about how do you use it in program reiteration. I've talked to grantees that collect additional satisfaction data. All grantees have fidelity monitoring logs. So again, thinking about how can you take this compilation of data that you have available to you to really think about CQI and think about the legislative requirements that we'll be talking about today. So can anyone share in the chat if you have experience or what your experience might have been using your performance measures to make a change to your program? Was there anything you learned from the performance measures that inspired you to change your program? And feel free to drop it in the chat. All right, well, if people are still, you're welcome to keep thinking and think about, I would challenge you over the next year to think about how might you use your performance measure data to inform future programming, and what might that look like? So someone mentioned that, or Sandra put in the chat that their students were more likely to complete surveys when they were paper and pencil versus online. And Zoa mentioned that changing how you administer the survey based upon literacy levels based on data. Great. And I would challenge you to keep thinking about how it might come back to kind of how that impacts your programming as well. These are really helpful. All right, I'm going to kick it over to Michelle, who's going to help us get acquainted with Poll Everywhere.
Yes, thank you, Katie. So this is going to be our first opportunity to work in Poll Everywhere. I am dropping the link in the chat for you all to use. You can also participate by texting PREP 122021 to 22333 to join. So again, that link is in the chat there. It's the very last message in the chat. So you can click on that or copy and paste that into your browser, or you can use your phone to text to join. And we are going to participate in 3 questions before a little friendly competition. So our first question that we have for you is, how comfortable do you feel describing the legislative requirements for PrEP? Our options are very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, neutral, somewhat uncomfortable, or very uncomfortable. We've got responses coming in, folks are joining. Give everybody just a few more seconds to.
And some folks need more, that number again. Can you put, the number is 22333. Although I'm not getting the ping on the text message.
And the instructions are located at the top of this screen that you're seeing right there, but I'm going to go ahead and add that to the chat again. And if you are texting, you will send the number 1, 2, 3, or 4 based on your response here. Okay, so it's stabilizing. We have the majority of our folks feeling neutral. Oh, drops. Oh, okay, still getting some coming in there, but it looks okay. It looks like the majority of our attendees are feeling neutral, somewhat comfortable, and somewhat uncomfortable. So our hope is that by the end of today's session, that we'll have folks feeling more comfortable. Next question. We've got another one for you. How comfortable do you feel describing the goals of your PrEP project? So thinking about what you are planning, how comfortable do you feel describing that? And I will drop the link once more in the chat for folks to respond. All right, there's confidence there. I like that. I like to see that. So right now we've got the majority feeling very comfortable describing the goals of your project. Give it another minute or so for other responses to come in. Okay, still landing with the majority feeling comfortable. And, for those feeling neutral, somewhat uncomfortable, and very uncomfortable, our goal also during this time together is to provide you with resources that might help enhance your programming and might make things more accessible for you. So hopefully today will help increase your comfort in that way. And of course, we are here to support you with technical assistance if needed as well. Thank you, Patrick. Next one. So this is our open-ended question here. What words come to mind when you think of the PrEP program requirements? What kinds of things do you think of? What are the key words or the components that come to mind when you think of the PrEP program requirements? And again, you can join by text or by web. And what we'll see is a word cloud start to form based on your submissions. comprehensive prevention. And the more consistency we have in words, the larger they will appear. So many folks have submitted prevention. That's why prevention is a bit larger size. Many folks have submitted comprehensive, health, holistic is in there. That's great. Opportunities, evidence-based interventions. This is amazing. I love to see this. We've got education in there. I think I saw an empowering. It's moving on me. Skill building, consent, accurate. So we're using accurate medically informed programming, adult lives. This is great. And prevention and comprehensive just keep getting larger and larger. So this is a great summary of the program requirements. And what we'll go through now is a detail of those program requirements, and we're going to do so in a friendly competition way. I'll toss it back to Katie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, so using your same the same login that everyone's already logged in on. That's why we wanted to do a little bit of practice. We should all be there now. We're gonna have a little competition. We're gonna compete for bragging rights. And if you'd like, we're happy to showcase you on the Exchange connection for grantees. You'll get points for the game based on both correct answers and speed. So get ready. We're gonna just go through a few questions and then we'll share some resources as we go through. All right, Patrick, I think we're ready. All right, so the first question, everybody ready? Programs should implement education on both abstinence and contraception for the prevention of, and get ready to respond. A, risky behavior, B, pregnancy, C, obesity, D, sexually transmitted infections, E, B, and D, or F, A, and C. Go ahead and just respond to the text. I think that's how we can respond, right, Patrick?
That's right.
Or in the browser. Oh, Patrick, do we have a new poll? My I got a note back that my poll has not opened. Did others get that note? Although it looks like people. Well, 90% of you got the right answer. So that's great. A key aspect of the PrEP program is to provide education on both abstinence and contraception with the goal of helping young people avoid both pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. As you review your programming, many of you, I think, review your programming annually at a minimum. Consider how much information and skill building activities you are providing on these topics and ensure that it's sufficient by reviewing data or exploring the needs assessments in your states and communities. It's really important to ensure that facilitators delivering the program are comfortable providing information on these topics and that they have current information on the topics. So I would recommend that you, do for any new facilitators, obviously lots of training in the program, but also attending, like thinking about how can you do teach backs about these particular topics, have them practice many times. And the CDC website is a great resource for ensuring you're up to date on your contraceptive methods. There are a few new ones released in the last few years and strategies for avoiding STIs. And we're gonna be putting a handout in the chat when we get to the end of this presentation that will have more resources for where you can find up-to-date information. And if you go to the next slide, we also just wanted to review a couple ideas. For those of you who are newer to PrEP, here are some examples of activities that you can use to discuss both abstinence and contraception. So you can use lessons from evidence-based curriculum. You could bring in an external medical provider who can actually share more information about specific contraceptive methods, or it's great if the methods themselves, they can bring methods themselves in for people to see. You can incorporate role plays on saying no. You can have brainstorms on the advantages of delaying sex. You can watch a video on any of these topics. And you can also ask participants to research a contraceptive method and share it back with the group. Now, this could be in addition to if you feel like the information that you're providing in your program is not enough. And as we mentioned, it's really critical to provide training, and all the programs go through medical accuracy review as well. So just an update for folks that the attendees have about 30 seconds to respond to the poll. So respond pretty quickly. We're going to go ahead and go to the next question, Patrick. The next question is, true or false? Grantees are required to implement 2 of the 6 adulthood preparation subjects. True or false? Oh, it says polls do not, is there a number we're supposed to put in for that, Patrick? For the text? It says the poll doesn't support. Maybe it's 1 for true and 2 for false.
I think that's how it is, Katie. Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. Or maybe you just have to go to a web-enabled device. That's what it's telling me. All right. It doesn't look like the text messaging is working as well. So I would encourage you, yeah, and Michelle said this in the chat as well, to go to the web, like it'll send you a web link. So go to the web link and do it on your phone or on the computer as well. Awesome. And the answer is actually false. So prep programs should incorporate 3 of 6 possible APS topics into their programming. This can be done through existing curricula, through supplementing the curriculum that you're using with additional lessons, or exploring a curriculum that targets specific APS. We'll be talking later on in the webinar in more depth about the conceptual model for the APS and how addressing APS can help you attain the overall programmatic goals that we talked about of reducing risk for teen pregnancy and STIs while supporting the development of other critical skills for youth. So this is, and we'll be sharing some resources and ideas for activities on where you can get more information about how to think about which APS that you might want to integrate, and activities and ideas for where you can find ways to do that. Awesome. Number 3, how should prep programs address behavior change? Is it through implementing an evidence-based program, incorporating elements of effective programs, follow a logic model that connects program activities to behavior change based in research, or D, all of the above? And it works really well on the web. So if you are struggling, the web is better. Excellent. That's correct. All of the above can be used to address behavior change. And sorry for any noise. I have a quarantining 4-year-old at home. So a primary goal of the PrEP program is to implement evidence-based and effective programming that changes youth behavior, so they're at less risk of outcomes such as unplanned pregnancy and STIs, which we've discussed. Just for your information, especially if you're new, between 2009 and 2019, HHS conducted a review of effective teen pregnancy prevention programs, which we've included a link to in the handout that we'll post. And this could be a great place to start if you're selecting a new program, if you're considering exploring to a new setting, or you want to explore what else might be available if you're not satisfied with the programming that you're picking. For some grantees, using a program out of the box is not a great fit. And so you might need to decide to use elements of effective programs. And regardless of how you incorporate evidence-based into your work, you need to have a logic model that supports the overall program design and links your implementation efforts with the outcomes of interest. And some of our grantees will be talking, Darlene and Kit will talk a little bit more about how that they operationalize that in their states. All right, let's go to the next question. So you need to maintain blank to the program model or consult with developers to obtain approval for adaptations. What goes in the blank? Maintain blank. Awesome. Amazing. Everybody got it right. Yes. You need to maintain fidelity to the program model. So maintaining fidelity, as you all well know, is really critical. And thinking back to our earlier conversation about CQI, if you don't maintain fidelity or don't mark down kind of what went wrong or kind of track fidelity in some, not what went wrong, what happened that might impact fidelity, it's hard to understand what you did and therefore difficult to understand what you need to change. I just want to note that while the goal of maintaining fidelity is to stick as closely as possible to your implementation plan, there might be circumstances that make it really difficult to do so, like the global pandemic that we've all been living through for the last 2 years. And so with this in mind, it's equally important that you all think about how are you setting up your fidelity tracking in such a way that when there's deviation from the plan, you can track it. And that while you do want to maintain fidelity, that you're also capturing what actually happened. So that, for example, if there is a lesson that continuously takes longer than is expected in the program booklet, you're able to then adjust your programming accordingly. But if you're just checking off like, yeah, we did that, yeah, we did that, yeah, we did that, and there were no problems, it's hard to know when those items come up, and it's hard to address and deal with them if you're not accurately capturing what you're doing. So thinking about how do you set that up in a way that it's non-punitive, but clear that the goal is sticking with fidelity. And I think that's it's a fine line right there. And also it could identify places where your facilitators might need extra training or support. All right, next question. So prep grantees are responsible for ensuring that the programs they implement are blank. Medically accurate, age appropriate, culturally appropriate, or all of the above. Awesome. You guys could all be delivering this webinar. So it's critical that programs are medically accurate, age appropriate, and culturally appropriate. If your program has not been reviewed by FISB for medical accuracy, you'll need to submit it for review, and you can coordinate with your project officer about how that takes place. I would love to hear in the chat. I know I don't want to take too much time here or take us out of the game, but what are some strategies that your team uses to ensure that your program is culturally or age appropriate? I'd love to hear it, just a few strategies. What do you do to make sure that your program is culturally or age appropriate? Great. Awesome. So Amanda says they collect student feedback to gather age appropriateness. You have outside consultants evaluate it, engage youth in the process. Great. a curricula that was designed for the age group, organizational resource groups, use language and examples that are relatable to the population, utilize the language they use. Excellent. And we do have a link to resources, video approved adaptation. Awesome. For red, green, and yellow light adaptation. So many things that you can do for cultural and age fit could be green light adaptations, or potentially yellow light. And Zoa says they had community members help choose the curricula and then have youth helped adapt things like the role plays and activities with language that is appropriate and more resonant to them. Awesome. These are great ideas for how to do that. Thank you all. Okay, back to the competition. Number 6, true or false, grantees are required to provide referrals for healthcare and other services. Grantees are required to provide referrals for healthcare and other services. Awesome. The correct answer on this is true. So most of you all got that right. Providing referrals is important for ensuring that, and this is one of the programmatic requirements, is providing referrals. It's important for ensuring that youth have access to the services that they need. Your program should be familiar with resources that are available in your community for your youth and have a plan for how you can refer them to those. We've done a separate webinar on this topic, and in the handout that I keep referencing, which we drop into the chat, you'll have a link to that webinar and encourage you to check that out if you're curious or if you think you want to explore your referral network in more depth. And it's a great practice to review your referrals annually. A lot of times that's not, like there's turnover in the community, people might have left. How can you make sure that the similar grant programs are running or something like that? It's also important to note that PrEP grant funds cannot be used to pay for those referral services. So you can't pay for the referral. However, there are many other funding streams available in communities that can cover some of those costs. And if you need more support in that area about referrals, then we're happy to provide TA on that topic. And Michaela mentioned in the chat that you don't ever collect information. You're not required to refer, but report if referrals are made. So that's a little bit different than how I read the legislative requirements, but something good to check on with your, let's see. Yeah, the legislative requirement specifically says providing referrals to healthcare and other services, but it might not be something that you report on. It's a good practice to follow. Awesome. We'll go to the next question. Grantees are required to include blank and blank in their programming. Grantees are required to include blank and blank in their programming. Trauma-informed care and conflict resolution and resiliency skills and positive youth development, trauma-informed care, and a positive youth development approach. Great, awesome. Yes, grantees are required to include or to take a trauma-informed care approach, as well as a positive youth development approach in their programming. And just to reiterate, the PrEP program is grounded in trauma-informed care and takes a positive youth development approach to offering programming and services. And we have numerous tools available on the exchange and through other trusted websites that can help you consider how to ensure that you're delivering a program that is both trauma-informed and uses a PYD approach. We just did a toolkit last year that is almost like an implementation checklist for trauma-informed care that facilitators can use as they're preparing for a program implementation. It is also worth noting that implementing the APS really builds on the positive youth development approach, and many of the strategies and recommendations for incorporating APS will lead you to a more positive youth development focused approach in your work. So the APS have a great overlap there. All right, I think we have one more question. We go to the next question, Patrick. PrEP program, true or false, PrEP programs can serve youth in out-of-home care settings as long as they are under age 20. And I realize this is a little bit of a tricky question, but we did classify it as true. PrEP programs can target youth between the ages of 10 and 19 who are high risk for becoming pregnant or have special circumstances, including living in or aging out of foster care, being homeless, living with HIV/AIDS, being victims of human trafficking, and then you could be pregnant or be a mother up to age 21. So that's where the question could get a little confusing, or residing in an area with a high teen birth rate. All right, Patrick, can we unveil the winner? Congratulations, we have 4 first place winners. So we have Tyra C, Zoa, and then we have 2 people who participated anonymously, and you just edged out the next winners down. So we will follow up with you all separately to get to post something about you on the exchange, the grantee network, if you're interested. Thanks so much. I hope that was a little bit of a more interesting way to learn about or run through the legislative requirements, should I say. All right, you can go to the next slide. Great. So just a summary, and thank you again for playing our game. We have prepared this handout, and Michelle's going to post it in the chat now. It includes more information about each of the implementation requirements that we discussed today, with lots of links to different tools. And again, if you're in need of more in-depth TA support on any of these, you can submit a TA request. And this is a summary of the implementation requirements that we talked about. Michelle, could you pop that in the chat when you get a chance?
I sure will.
Awesome. And then I'm going to kick it over to Michelle, who's going to do a poll question for us.
Yes. So taking a look at the 10 legislative requirements, we want to know which ones you'd like to explore more after this conversation. So we're hopping back into Poll Everywhere. And for this question, you can participate via web or on the phone. So if you do want to text, you are texting PrEP 122-021-222-333. And again, those instructions are at the top of the screen that you're looking at. As we are reviewing the legislative requirements, what is of more interest to you? Also, while we're waiting for some more responses to come in, the handout that Katie is referencing in regards to resources related to the legislative requirements is now in the chat. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you all are interested in implementing adulthood preparation subjects, which is great because we're going to spend the next segment talking about that. So very timely, and we will keep this list ongoing to kind of cue our upcoming topics for TA. Thank you all for participating in that poll question. I'm going to toss it to Kit to share some of the great work that is happening in Wisconsin.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. And thanks, Katie, for leading us through that friendly competition. This has been really fun so far, and it's also helping keep me awake in this late afternoon when there's been too many Christmas cookies consumed. I hope I can keep the fun going, and I will apologize in advance for not having very interactive or fun visual aids. Because my department takes quite a long time to review and approve presentation materials in a non-COVID time, much less during a COVID time. So I was unable to create any new content. I swear I'm a little bit cooler in person, but stick with me here. And I'll kind of give you an overview of the landscape of prep in Wisconsin at this time. So next slide, please. I'm going to kick things off with a bit of a program overview. I think it's always helpful to get a glimpse into how we structure specific programs, given the variety of program structures and models that exist across various funding streams from FISB. So hopefully this visual aid is helpful to you. We'll be looking at it for a second here. So in Wisconsin, we use an implementation science framework to support our local implementation providers. The whole kind of premise behind implementation science framework was developed with the understanding that evidence-based and evidence-informed programs can be really challenging to take from theory to practice or from curriculum to facilitation. And so especially if, from a more controlled environment where we feel like things are predictable, and then we go into a classroom setting with a bunch of youth and it's a different story. So we try to support local agencies by structuring partners in place to be available for technical assistance needs as they relate to evaluation, fidelity, youth engagement, grant management needs. And that's like the third structure up from the bottom there. You'll see that. And we've had the structure for roughly the last 6 years, and it's worked really well for our local partners. It hasn't always been that way, but I would say in the last couple of years, we've really kind of sunk into it and really collaborated. I would say it's really the main contributor to keeping all of our partners and providers involved and accountable in our grant requirements as well. And we collaborate all the time, which offers a really unique and effective approach to CQI, as Katie was talking about earlier. So for example, our fidelity monitor, who's actually on here today, hi, and shout out to Nancy. She will go and do an observation, and she's also a curriculum coach, so really knows our materials inside and out. She might notice a need for a facilitator's needs for improvement, and then we'll work directly with me and our training partners to devise a plan to address those needs almost immediately. So, and then just recently, we've been working with our training provider who just did a pretty in-depth training needs assessment focus groups with local implementation partners, which will inform trainings and learning community calls for the next year. So it really took, like I said, it took some time to get to this point of collaboration, but I will say it's been one of our strongest assets in addressing our federal requirements. As for implementation sites, you'll see them second from the bottom. We have 4 of them. We award 4 subrecipients to replicate our evidence-informed program. Each site, depending on their proposed reach, will serve anywhere from 100 to 300 youth annually with full fidelity programming. So meaning we have our participants attending 75% or more of the program sequence. We really focus on quality over quantity with the way that we've structured our program, just meaning that we fund a smaller amount of local partners to serve the federally identified priority population of adolescents to further promote protective factors, such as youth-adult partnerships, engaging youth as community leaders, and teaching advocacy skills to emphasize the unique experience that adolescence is. So a really holistic approach to prep. And that's what those adult preparation subjects are for, as we alluded to earlier in the webinar here. This also helps having just consistent messaging across sites that's really rooted in positive youth development and trauma-informed approaches, because we utilize each other's strengths and really learn from what each community is doing, and we take the time to connect each site to each other to just learn from each other. So next slide, please. Thank you. On this side, you will see the breakdown of what our program sequence looks like. The curriculum that we currently use is Rights, Respect, Responsibility, or the 3 Rs, which is developed by Advocates for Youth. We cover 3 of the 6 adulthood preparation subjects. We cover positive adolescent development, healthy relationships, and healthy life skills as our 3. And then for our program sequence, we have about 13 lessons that cover a ton of information, but primarily around the topics of abstinence, STIs, HIV, AIDS, contraception, gender and sexuality, and then adolescents' rights as it relates to reproductive health care in Wisconsin. As I mentioned, positive adolescent development and healthy relationships, we do use the curriculum to cover those APS. And the 3 Rs has a really strong foundation and focus on healthy relationships and what it might look like to be a part of an unhealthy relationship. So we love our curriculum for that. As for healthy life skills, we have a partner program called Providers and Teens Communicating for Health. We call them our patch program because we love acronyms. Hey, everybody loves acronyms here. And we extend our program sequence by 2 hours by having this program come in. So we have youth actually come in person or virtually, depending on the site's needs, to deliver content focused on how youth can manage their healthcare, how they can advocate for their well-being, and how they can access the care that they need in their proposed community. So the youth on these patch teams are from the communities that they're living in and that they're serving and educating. So really tangible examples of like where youth can seek services that are youth friendly as well. So Patch is actually a nationally recognized program by the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, AMCHIP, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And they also have an adjacent program that they run youth advocacy fellowship models through, which is recognized as a promising practice through AMCHIP. And at the state level, we use and consult with these youth all the time throughout the year to help plan and evaluate our programs. We close out the program sequence with 1 hour of community service learning, knowing that a sense of community and belonging is a great protective factor for our youth. And obviously, on the bookends of this sequence are entry and exit surveys, so can't forget about those as another requirement. This totals our program sequence at roughly 16 hours of intended content, and we work with our sites, obviously, to adjust that appropriately or adapt appropriately based on their community needs. So that is our hope, and that is our standard of programming. Our sites do have the option to use 3 evidence-based and evidence-informed curriculum that we've approved at the state level. We did a really in-depth curricula review last year that identified the 3 Rs, Flash and Positive Prevention Plus, as curricula that met our youth's needs for information that they'd like to receive in sexual health content. And just kind of randomly enough, all of our sites selected the 3 Rs as their curriculum for implementation this year. On the next slide, just kind of a breakdown of how we ensure that our local implementation partners cover abstinence and contraception information in a trauma-informed way through the positive youth development framework. And it's pretty much what I've talked about already, is using that implementation science framework to support continuous quality improvement. We hold annual grantee kickoff meetings that really dig into our grant requirements and like the grant timeline throughout the year. So what they can expect starting in the fall, throughout the winter and spring and summer. And then we do a shared visioning discussion that talks about our goals and objectives as a collective statewide program and what the PYD framework is. And this really helps us focus on not just risk factors that youth might be exposed to or experiencing, but it allows us to shift to protective factors and why we have the programs that we do. We reiterate these concepts throughout the year through monthly check-in calls with our implementation sites, and obviously we call it our program support team. That's our implementation science framework. We're all really on the same page of what's expected and what's required and what our goals are and what our why is. We offer curriculum-specific trainings and other skills-based webinars that are based off of feedback from our sites and youth directly. Our facilitators are trained and required to work with our fidelity monitor and curriculum coach prior to facilitating independently. We we ground our planning, implementation, and evaluation efforts in youth voice to be more intentional, to improve reach and impact. And let me tell you, this has been the bread and butter of our last few years, especially guiding us through the pandemic. It really has just grounded the work and brought us back to center of why we do what we do, especially during hard times. We partner, and lastly, we partner with agencies who are eager to work with youth and who want to provide quality programming and resources. So we do this by having shorter award periods and evaluating how equitably we distribute funding opportunities, and how we structure our applications. So this is a newer effort internally at Wisconsin Department of Health, but we've been working internally and externally to understand the barriers and benefits of how we fund agencies to carry out the work, and how we meet youth of the highest need and truly meet youth of the highest need. So those are a few tangible examples of how we meet our federal requirements, which I know that was a whirlwind of information, and I probably talked really fast. And this webinar is jam-packed with a ton of really great stuff and interactive stuff. So if I did say something too fast, or maybe I said a buzzword that piqued your interest, please feel welcome to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to collaborate. We love collaborating. A lot of my ideas are not novel. They've been from other states that have been doing the work and serving youth with their best interest in mind. So again, happy to collaborate and continue the quality improvement efforts that we have. So I actually do have to hop off the webinar early. I'm so sorry for that. But please direct your questions at Katie and Michelle, and I can get back to you. Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks for letting me present.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Kit. And at the end of the presentation, we do have your contact information listed, so folks can reach out to you directly if they have any questions. And of course, Katie and I are welcome to field those as well. We've got some thank yous. Folks are thanking you for your contributions in the chat as well. So thinking about our 6 adulthood preparation subjects, we are jumping back into Poll Everywhere. Which of the 6 topics are you implementing right now? Oh, got a decent mix so far. We'll see where things settle. And this poll question, you can participate via the web or via text as well. Here is the web link if folks have navigated away from it and need it handy. So of the 6 topics, we have adolescent development, career and educational success, financial literacy, healthy life skills, health relationships, parent-child communication. It looks like majority, settling a little bit. All right, the majority is healthy relationships, followed by healthy life skill. Okay. Healthy life skills, and then followed by adolescent development. Of course, we do have programs implementing financial literacy, parent-child communication, and then career and educational success. No doubt all of these topics are key and integral to youth labs. We will spend some time talking about how to implement them and providing examples for how to do that right now. And I'll toss it to Heather to keep us going.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it. I have to say, what I thought was just most interesting about that poll was that maybe one of the first times I saw that folks in a group, financial literacy was not the least implemented APS. So often in all of the work I've done over the years on APS, it's usually financial literacy is actually often the least covered APS. And so it was really great to see so many folks out there doing great work on financial literacy. So as Michelle mentioned, I'm here to talk specifically about the adulthood preparation subjects and address how they address the legislative requirements required for the prep program. Next slide, please. So I'm always remiss because the work I'm talking about is completed as part of the PMAPs or performance measure and adulthood preparation subject project that Mathematica and our partner Child Trends conduct under contract to ACF. I always have to acknowledge that. Our work that I'm talking about today was prepared as part of that contract. Our team is large and vast with staff from both Mathematica and Child Trends contributing to the APS work over time. I cannot talk about what we did unless we had all the help of them. So thank you all for that. And also we've always benefited over time from all the support and feedback from our project officers at both the Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation, or OPRE, as well as FISB. And everything I'm talking about today does not necessarily reflect official policy for HHS. So next slide, please. So as an overview, I'm going to cover two topics during my time today. First, I want to highlight the adulthood preparation subject conceptual models and unified framework and how they can support you in meeting the legislative requirements, as well as begin to introduce a tool that is getting near completion that can support you in assessing how well curricula you are using in your program cover the adulthood preparation subjects as defined in those conceptual models. As I discuss these models, I do want to highlight that they are presented in a report that's available on OPRE's website. And when I'm done talking, I will put the link to that report in the chat. And in addition, the conceptual models are also highlighted in a recent companion resource guide that was developed by the RTI and TNTA team that builds out from the conceptual models. That's also a great resource to look at. Next slide. So as noted earlier in this webinar, programs implementing PrEP all must follow a set of legislative requirements that include providing education on abstinence contraceptive use for the prevention of sexually transmitted infections and teen pregnancy, educating youth on 3 of 6 adulthood preparation subjects. We covered what those subjects were in that last poll. Also replicating evidence-based programs, including programming that uses a positive use development approach and is trauma-informed. Kit did a great job of giving some examples of how Wisconsin is doing that. And then also legislative requirement regarding targeting high-risk or vulnerable populations. Now, it's kind of recognized that while the legislation specified these expectations, in some cases it only offered limited guidance on what was expected for programming. So when it really came to kind of translating those requirements into programming on the ground. And this was particularly true for the adulthood preparation subjects. Next slide. And it's really that lack of specification is what led to the development of the conceptual models I'm going to talk about. That these conceptual models really intend to support grantees in meeting the legislative requirements related to implementing the adulthood preparation subjects. They also aim to provide grantees with guidance to inform their implementation of APS programming, and they do this really in 4 specific ways. One is, as you'll see, the conceptual models really intend to help grantees understand what's meant by each of the adulthood preparation subjects. They also can be used to help guide selection around which of the APSs you might want to implement in your program. They can also be used to help develop or select appropriate content that's related to the APSs as they apply to PrEP. And finally, they can support looking and thinking about the outcomes that are going to be relevant to the APSs. Next slide. And so before I kind of turn and look more closely at the conceptual models, I always find it helpful to kind of do a quick review of key terms and definitions related to the conceptual models. There's 4 specific terms I wanted to talk about. And first is, what do we mean by what a conceptual model is? For us on the APS task, when we're saying conceptual model, what we really mean is it's a pictorial representation or a graphic of the theory or mechanism of change behind how adding APS content into PrEP programming can support either enhancing or expanding the short-term and long-term outcomes for your adolescents participating in your programs. And I use a couple of terms there that I'm also going to kind of define. But before I define those, I next want to kind of just talk about what we mean by precursors. And precursors are the characteristics and attributes that youth might have when they come into your program. And then really relevant for the conceptual models is how we talk about outcomes. And there's two types of outcomes highlighted in the conceptual models. We refer to these as enhanced and expanded outcomes. And what we mean by this is the enhanced PrEP outcomes are the outcomes that would be typically targeted by a pregnancy prevention program. So these would be outcomes related to sexual activity, contraception use, decreased pregnancy, incidence of sexually transmitted infections. And in contrast, the expanded PrEP outcomes are really kind of that broader set of outcomes that may look at some of those non-sexual health outcomes related to a PrEP program. With really the idea is that by adding the APS and content, you might be able to address a broader set of outcomes. And examples of what these might be include academic success or physical and mental health. Next slide. So in the interest of time, I'm only going to show and kind of dive deeply into one of the 6 conceptual models. And as I noted, I really encourage you to look at the report that gives you all the detail on all 6 of the conceptual models. But as I introduce the conceptual model, I'm going to highlight both the structure of the conceptual model, which is consistent across all 6, as well as the content for one model. And I'm going to focus specifically on the conceptual model related to adolescent development. Next slide. So here is the model. I appreciate it's probably depending on the size of your screen. And if you're looking at this on a phone, you definitely are seeing nothing other than squiggles. And that's why if you look at the report, you can definitely look at this in more closely. So I know these are dense models, but we do really pack a lot of information into a single page through this dense model. And if you look at the conceptual models, as I noted, they're all going to have this kind of similar template. And let's walk through the template and also kind of do a deeper dive on what specifically it looks like for adolescent development. So the top of every conceptual model starts with a definition for that adulthood preparation subject. The definition really was intended to kind of define what this APS means in the context of PrEP, because these are really big subjects, each of them. So really trying to tailor it for the context of PrEP. And for adolescent development, so the definition really reflects or focuses on the physical, cognitive, social, and emotional maturation that occurs in youth between the ages of 10 and 19. And the definition also highlights the need for age-appropriate programs and education to support youth development throughout this period. Directly below the definition in each model is our theory of change. And that theory of change builds from the definition to articulate why including that specific APS may help prepare youth and young adults to transition to adulthood. For adolescent development, the theory of change focuses on how healthy development is defined as meeting developmental milestones related to the physical, cognitive, social, and emotional well-being. It also recognizes that youth development programs have the ability to support youth with this development that may benefit a whole range of outcomes for the youth, such as academic achievement, social skills, physical or mental health, substance use, or unprotected sexual activity. So then below those 2 boxes, and I think of those 2 boxes as kind of really like the big picture of what the conceptual model is trying to achieve. And then below it is kind of a set of boxes that really follows a left to right orientation. And they kind of take those 2 boxes above it and go a little bit deeper. And so the very first box on the left-hand side is what we call our precursors. And these are really the factors that may affect youth prior to or as they enter the program. And the precursors are organized into developmental tasks that youth can complete. So for adolescent development and examples, brain development or sexual maturation. There's also identified risk factors, such as experiencing trauma during childhood, and protective factors, such as healthy relationships with families and peers. After the precursors, we move to the topics box, which is in the middle. And these are really topics that programs could address in their programming related to whatever the focal APS is. So for adolescent development, you see, and there's this real theme in the adolescent development model around physical, cognitive, social, and emotional maturation or development. And that's carried through in the topics. And those topics really are identified by those 4 areas. By identifying specific topics programs could address related to each area. So for example, for physical development, programs could address topics such as anatomy and physical development and maturation, as well as how to support youth with developing skills that will enable them to manage health risks. Below the box on topics is the box that we call considerations related to program design and implementation. Some of these considerations, I should say, are going to be relevant to multiple models. So if you look at the whole set, there might be some considerations that are going to common or pop up in multiple models, and other considerations might be specific to something about the subject. For example, adolescent development, some of the considerations here include ensuring physical and psychological safety for youth in programming related to this topic, as well as making sure the programming offers youth opportunities to feel a sense of belonging. And now the final two boxes, if you keep moving from left to right on the conceptual model here, are the two boxes related to outcomes. They have that organization of enhanced and expanded outcomes, with the enhanced outcomes really being focused on those outcomes that the other parts of the prep program may be addressing. So here for adolescent development, you see increase in abstinence, increase in contraceptive use, decrease in frequency of sexual activity. And then below it is the expanded prep outcomes. So those are those other domains that you might see changes in. Here, there's two examples would be, you might see an increase in a youth's emotional well-being and an increase in youth social skills. Next slide. So I now want to turn, so if you want more information on the conceptual models, I definitely say go look at the report. But I now want to turn to talking about the unified framework that was also developed as part of this effort. And this tool, the unified framework, was really developed as a tool to help identify commonalities or overlap across the 6 models. The development of the framework focused on identifying elements that were in 2 or more of the models in the precursors and outcomes sections of those models. And this really supported a focus on understanding how APS content can help to improve the expanded and enhanced outcomes. Also, you'll see when we look at the unified framework that it does highlight within it the importance of the positive youth development framework. And we've intentionally put it in the unified framework and not a specific APS conceptual model, recognizing the centrality of the positive youth development framework to all prep programs, regardless of the APS a program is implementing. Next slide. And you can just jump forward one more. So this slide here introduces or shows the framework. You can see there's a really big section on the far left related to precursors. There's also a lot of detail on the outcomes on the far right, and in between them is the box that really is focused on programming. In terms of the precursors, what's listed here is any precursor that was identified as showing up in 2 or more of the conceptual models. And for each of the precursors identified, we also identify which of the APS conceptual models that precursor showed up in. So if you look closely here, you can look at, like, on the developmental tasks, a developmental task such as social and emotional skills development was actually in 5 of the 6 conceptual models, so it was really prevalent. But a different developmental task of, like, sexual maturation only appeared in 2 of the 6 conceptual models. It was adolescent development and healthy relationships. The middle box on programming, if you take a deep dive there, what it's really highlighting is the centrality, as I mentioned, of PYD. The whole top half of that box really focuses on why, how programs can incorporate positive youth development principles into their programs. And then next slide. So the final part of the unified framework is that look at outcomes, and those outcomes again are organized by enhanced and expanded outcomes. This slide just kind of makes bigger what those outcomes were in there. Again, the outcomes represent any outcomes that were identified in 2 or more of the conceptual models. So for the outcomes, most of the outcomes were in at least 3, if not more. And some of the outcomes are actually in all 6 of the conceptual models. For example, I'd point out under expanded prep outcomes, decreasing delinquency and disruptive behaviors was actually an outcome that showed up in all of the conceptual models. Next slide. Okay, so sorry, I thought I had another slide, but nope. So I think I'm now going to pass it on to Michelle for a question.
Thank you, Heather. I know folks are looking forward to taking a look at those resources that you mentioned quite a bit. So thinking about the implementation process, We are curious where each of you are in terms of that process. And we are jumping back into Poll Everywhere. If you still have that open, you can respond there. And again, I will drop that link right there. The instructions to text are located at the top of the screen. So have you decided? It's still a little bit of planning to do. Have you been incorporating APS subjects for quite some time, a few years? Or have you been implementing for some time? Are you an expert at APS implementation? Okay, nice. Whoa, oh, we were nicely split for a while. So this is a great representation. I think we have folks from across the board here, some of us a little bit earlier in our journey, some having implemented for several years, and then others implementing for even more time. So definitely an opportunity to kind of share resources and think about how we can support each other in this process moving forward. Next, I'm going to toss it back to Katie to share a little bit about the Adulthood Preparation Subjects Resource Guide that is available on the Exchange.
And before we do that, Heather wanted to share something about the APS tool that they are developing that we had slides for that somehow didn't make it into the final presentation by no fault of, sorry about that.
That's okay.
My fault.
No problem. That was my clunky ending. I was expecting 2 slides. And so I don't have the slides now, but I did just want to note one more resource that is getting close to being final related to the APSs. And I think folks will really be excited about this because it's a request we have heard over time as we have been rolling out these conceptual models. And that is that our team is working to finalize what we're calling a curriculum assessment tool. The curriculum assessment tool will be aligned with the APS conceptual models. And so it's really going to kind of in some ways do that crosswalk between the definitions that we have on the conceptual models, as well as the topics identified, and support you in then looking at the curricula you're using and being able to say, does my curriculum address, or what parts of my curriculum really address the topics highlighted in the conceptual model? So if you're addressing, say, financial literacy, you could take your curriculum and kind of map it to the topics in the financial literacy conceptual model to really get a sense of coverage. When we're expecting to roll these out in the early part of 2022, when we roll them out, there will be both a blank tool to support you looking at the curricula you use and comparing it to the conceptual models in that way, as well as 4 completed tools that we have, where we have reviewed very commonly used curricula amongst the prep grantees and kind of done that crosswalk or that mapping ourselves. For those 4, we've also worked with the developers to make sure they're in alignment kind of with what the assessment was. And then we'll also have some resource and tools to support you and kind of really taking a closer look at that. So please be on the lookout for those in the early part of 2022. We're excited to be able to make them available. Thanks, Katie.
Awesome. Yeah, we're excited. I think that will be a really helpful tool. I know it is. It is a question we hear a lot.
It is, and I'm glad that we
that'll be
could
good.
kind of, we could develop that because it is a really common one. I think you guys have gotten it with the resource guide too.
Yeah, that's a great segue. So the other tool that we have for you all, it's in the handout that Michelle put in the chat, is the Adulthood Preparation Resource Guide. We go through, we pulled the conceptual models from the report that Heather and her team developed into the resource guide, and then dive in more specifically about like, how could you do different activities to help you reach those particular APS. And so we just pulled together a few slides where it gives you a sense of different activities that you could use, but I'd really encourage you to check out the resource guide itself for more ideas. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Darlene, because I want to make sure, I know we only have 14 more minutes, so I want to hear from Darlene as well, and happy to answer more questions about the APS at some point. Go ahead, Darlene.
Thanks, Katie. All right, a lot of great information. This is awesome. All right, so my name is Darlene DePina again, and I am the program director for the Adolescent Health Initiatives program at Arizona Department of Health Services. I oversee state prep and state SRE, among other adolescent health topics. Just as background, we have about 24 agencies that are funded by federal prep and SRE, as well as state lottery dollars to do teen pregnancy prevention educational services. So just to give you a layout of the land, we have currently 6 sub-grantees under prep. All right, thank you for moving that forward. So I think Kit did a great job of providing an overview of how her department is structured. I'm going to provide just a snapshot of how Arizona implements APS. So in general, to the core program delivery, so with the curriculum or program models, Arizona sub-grantees are required to integrate at least 3 APS into their prep programs. So you see listed here the APS topics that we've elected, and you can notice that parent communication, that last one, the 6th, is not included. And that's just because we really focus on the need and listen to our sub-grantees when it comes to implementation in general. So at the time, folks were having trouble with, providing education to parents, but we've since then integrated the optional parent education delivery or services through our other funding streams, so SRE and state lottery funded. So just as you know, it's 6 in total, but we just have 5 here for folks to choose 3 from. Sub-grantees can also, we just make a note that either financial literacy or educational career success should be emphasized when delivering services to high school aged youth. All right, next slide. All right, so this is our implementation, our methods of implementation rather. So APS are, they can select the 3 within the core program models. They can develop a 45-minute lesson using other resources, or have guest presentations or some type of field trip. And I'll get into each and every one of these. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so this is a huge table of our program models that we offer for our sub-grantees to deliver. So as I mentioned, some APS are covered in the program models and don't need to be covered further if they're choosing to elect 3. In this table that you see here are the APS subjects that are covered within curricula that we use in Arizona. So again, for background, we have what is called a policy and procedures manual for our TPP program that lists important contract and program requirements. And we also have an approved list of curriculum that our sub-grantees can use per funding, in which we've adapted from the evidence-based list from the former Office of Adolescent Health, now Office of Population Affairs. So it's funny that, Heather, you mentioned that this new tool is coming, because we did our own cross-reference of what APS is covered in our program models. So I think that tool will be super helpful. And I think that's like a kind of pause on our end to re-review and make sure that we're using that assessment accurately. But for now, this is kind of what we have here. So we cross-referenced our program models against the criteria for each APS. So this is what folks can use. Again, they can just choose to select from the program models. But in the next slide, I will kind of go through different methods or approaches. So say that an APS is not incorporated in a curriculum, or if a sub-grantee wants to go outside from that, they have the option to develop a lesson plan that should cover at least 45 minutes of a class period. Our sub-grantees offer programming in class, in schools rather, or community-based organizations, foster care group homes, but we ask for a minimum of 45 minutes. So an example program model or program models that can be used to develop lessons are shown here. They're not required per se to use what's identified here. These are just examples because again, a need that was discussed previous years that they really needed tangible lessons or curricular examples for how to implement educational career success or financial literacy that's not necessarily ingrained in typical TPP program models. And we can move forward. And this is adolescent development. So we recognize actually that there was a need to present puberty and emotional physical development in AZ communities. So we took adolescent development and the criteria and kind of used examples of puberty lessons, as you see here, that are actually pulled from core program models that are proved to be used. So this is particularly for middle school students. Again, the need was, different program sites like schools or community-based organizations were asking for, hey, our students are, we want this healthy life skills, or we want this program model, but they really don't know much about puberty in general. Can you provide something for this? So say that if a program really wants to implement love notes may, from the top of my head, I don't think they have a puberty lesson per se, but they can still implement love notes, but use one of these lessons that you see here before that core program model is implemented, so that it kind of serves that need that the site is requesting. Next slide. All right, and another option that we offer is to invite a local guest speaker that is an expert, quote unquote, in particular APS topic area. So an example would be like a representative from a local bank to cover financial literacy, whether it's, savings or another topic under that APS. Another option is having maybe a healthcare provider. I think that was mentioned earlier on in this webinar, to come talk about contraception, for example, and bring in demo models for the youth to kind of observe and learn more about. We actually have a sub-grantee that takes their youth to a local health clinic and have them go through like a tour to see what it would be like should they want to come in for reproductive health services. So it's an active engagement, if you will. So we still ask for a lesson plan that outlines the presentation or activity to be provided for approval before it can be implemented. Next slide. Okay, additional policies. So as I mentioned, there's policies within the policy and procedures manual that everyone has access to. But we ask that lessons be provided if they are not incorporated into a core model to be vetted by a TPP program manager at ADHS. And that's how we really ensure that those lessons follow the PrEP legislative requirements and that the APS selected is covered as well. And making sure that the lesson is delivered with a trauma-informed approach. So depending on the lesson activity, the program manager would see what considerations or follow-up that's needed with that lesson plan. And of course, maintaining fidelity is really important for us. So an additional policy is making sure that the APS that is not incorporated within a core model, that it's either delivered or implemented before the core program model or after, so that it doesn't interfere with those core components of the model. So either before or after. So that's another kind of policy we have. Next slide. All right, so here are some other ways that we ensure APS implementation is being adhered to. So every sub-grantee is required to provide a program logic model in their solicitation application before they're awarded their PrEP grant, and it can be revised if necessary within each year of the 5-year contract cycle. But we ask that, right at the bat, we have a program logic model, and applicants would need to list their proposed APS topics in their logic model as well as other areas within the application. I think, you know, for example, the narrative section also asks how for an APS breakdown, and applicants are required to provide how they plan to deliver APS and core program models in general, as well as how to do so in a positive youth development approach. So that was another big component for us as well. For example, you know, they would have to explain how it's ingrained in their facilitation, or, you know, other additional activities would be used, like community service learning projects. So afterwards, subgrantees, you know, if they were to be awarded, the APS implementation is monitored continuously by educator fidelity log submissions. So basically, we utilize a web-based portal called SharePoint, and it's like our TPP hub for reporting, communication, and resource sharing. So after a core curriculum and or an APS lesson is delivered, the health educator must submit a fidelity log that captures what they delivered, what, if any, adaptations were made, and basically how the lesson went overall. So the ADHS TPP staff is able to monitor what and how APS topics are being implemented. We also have a report form that is similar to kind of like the performance measures of attendance, reach, and dosage, which captures the number of hours received by youth as well. Yeah, and basically, in general, our TPP program managers communicate with their assigned sub-awardees regularly, and they're able to follow up and or provide some TA support if needed. We've integrated monthly check-in calls after COVID because within Arizona, just so it just varies from community to community, let alone county to county of how implementation is going with those challenges faced by COVID. So we have monthly check-in calls to, you know, allow for that extra TA support, as well as like semi-annual contractor meetings. But those are some of the ways that we, you know, monitor APS throughout. Just thinking off the top of my head, we have program monitoring reports developed by our contracted evaluators. And I think that may be a potential way to also highlight APS implementation. So that was kind of like a thought I had in my own head. But I think that's it. Sorry if I spoke a little too fast, but that is how we implement APS in Arizona.
Thanks so much for that overview, Darlene. I'm sure that folks have thoughts and questions about how to take what you've shared and apply it to some of their own work. Patrick, I'm going to skip right to the contact information slide. I want to thank you all for joining us today and spending your time with us. We're right up against time. If you do have any questions for us about anything that we've talked about today, if you would like to explore some topics further, please do reach out. We will, of course, make the slides available as well as the resources that were shared. I am including a link to the evaluation in the chat. If you can go to the next slide, Patrick. We want to hear your feedback about today's webinar and what you found valuable, how we can improve, and what other topics you'd like to hear from us on. So please take a moment and copy and paste that link into your browser and complete the evaluation. We also will send it out in a follow-up email as well. Again, thank you all for being here with us today. We hope that you found it valuable, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. I want to take just a quick moment to wish everyone a happy holidays, however you're spending, wherever you are spending. I hope that it is enjoyable and that you get the much needed rest that we all deserve. Take care, and thank you again for being here today.